Hello, everybody watching, potential people that are watching, and my teacher that's watching. Today, I'm going to be talking about some questions given to us for our African American Lit final. And yeah, there's 3 questions. I'm going to go at it one question at a time. These are pretty deep questions. So I'll have to discuss a lot of other things on top of not only the answer I'm providing. So the first question is, what does the study of African American literature reveal about the people's individual and collective American identity and culture in general? And when I think of African American literature and what I've learned throughout this semester, I definitely see the African American literature as a lens that uncovers the histories and issues otherwise concealed by the dominant race, which is white people in our society, American society. And African American literature goes into, first I would like to say, brutality, with the Frederick Douglass narrative and other slave narratives to be prime examples of the brutality that the slaves faced during this period and mark the beginning of our history as African Americans. And he had to see his aunt and numerous other people getting whipped as he was growing up, and with his aunt vividly describing the amount of pain she must have went through as she was getting whipped. The heart-rending screeches of my own aunt of mine. This is a quote from it. Heart-rending screeches of an aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip her naked back till she was literally covered in blood. That's very, to say the least, that's torture. Even when you consider us, or our position at the time being slaves, being seen as chattel, it makes sense why they tortured us and beat us this way. But it ended up carrying on through history and through Reconstruction on the brutality they continue to face or continue to impose upon us, especially with the lynchings, with the Red Record describing the lynching stories, and people like C.J. Miller, Hamp, Biscus being brutally tortured before their deaths by lynch mobs. And another thing African American literature does portray and talk about when it comes to the American identity and culture is white people's God complex and superiority complex over African Americans, in which, when it came to slavery and justifying slavery, that we were descendants of Ham, and that was an excuse as to why they were treating us that poorly. And that's definitely one of their numerous excuses to justify the torment or the horrid treatment of us as a people. And we can even see that, or we can even see another aspect of the American identity play into trying to ignore race and to ignore the issues surrounding race and try and keep it up as, or conceal it as if it's not an active occurring issue. We can see that in literature when it comes to the canon. Toni Morrison talks about the void of Black people, the void of minorities being in the canon, and the reasons of the literature surrounding the canon being entirely white, being quote unquote inevitable, naturally white, and saying that they were just simply better artists or better authors, and they just happen to so be white, which is definitely not true, saying that at all. And that the canon ended up being completely white, or being forcibly white was so to keep Black people out of it and other minorities out of the canon, to portray us as very less than not being on their level. And you see that, and Toni Morrison explains the different excuses they gave to that keep us out of the canon, one of them being how our literature is raw, but it needs refining, which undermines our issue. It gives credit to our issues, but it undermines our intelligence, that we need their white gaze, that we need their white opinion in order for us to reach the pinnacle of literature, which that being the canon. And African American literature does also talk about the hypocrisy of the American identity and how this is supposed to be, or America is supposed to be the land of the free, land of opportunity, land of justice, land of democracy. But we see in history and through the Red Record that white people definitely do not the American does not uphold those principles, that declaration. And the Red Record, when it comes to the different lynchings and the vivid stories that surround the lynching, or certain lynchings, which was a lot more than you would think, and more, that's very disturbing coming from a Black person, is how much and how frequent it happened, and how it was more common for a Black person to get lynched than for them to win a court case. Is very, very interesting to see, as this is supposed to be the land of justice, and lynching is a ruling, or a ruling for a crime based on a mob, which it does not go through the judicial system whatsoever. And you see Ham Biscuits, as I mentioned before, and C.J. Miller, with the C.J. Miller one being the most heart-wrenching one for me, because he was innocent and he was used as a scapegoat because he was Black, and essentially gave the mob a reason for him to be lynched, and taking the fall for the murder of 2 white girls, and him saying that saying that the law, or the lynch mob should have taken, or the men before him, if I'm going to be like reading from the quote itself, that the men for him, before he was about to be hanged, is not willing to let law take its course and go through the process that the American culture and identity stands for, and that he did not commit the crime whatsoever, and that if there's certainly no crime that should be punishable by death and deprive him of his life and liberty whatsoever. And you see in The Birth of the Nation, basically depicting the hypocrisy, or the fabrication of the African Americans' identity, and painting these negative stereotypes that carried on well after the film's release, going into present day. You definitely start to see the way the African American literature portrays betrays the American identity, and how, first off, brutal, how brutal the American culture and identity is toward Black people, the hypocrisy of the American identity, the God complex you start to see in individuals, and justifying why they're doing what they're doing in terms of keeping Black people out, or justifying their treatment of Black people, and them ignoring the entire race conversation in general. You see that when you go into African American literature. And then that goes into the second question, and saying, how does African American literature engage in issues of power, control, social justice, and ethics. And I decided to answer this question, I have to take it down into different sections, and starting with power, then going to control, justice, ethics, because there's a lot to talk about. And when it comes to power, I definitely see the issues of power come up as early on through the slave narrative, such as Frederick Douglass's narrative. And when he was discussing the house slave and field slave, and how the house slave was getting more amenities and privileges than the field slave, and how because they were getting more privileges as a slave, they had more power over the field slave. And he definitely goes into that when it comes to talking about the Great House Farm, and how the slaves around him viewed it as a privilege, as a position of power for a slave to work for the Great House Farms. And it was associated in their minds with greatness to be able to work at the Great House Farm and to be a slave at the Great House Farm. So that is the pinnacle, and he talks about it in the quote I'm about to say, but that is the pinnacle of us as a slave, while being a representative in the American Congress for a white person is as high, or that's their highest position of power compared to us. And our highest position of power is to be a slave at a different plantation. And that's definitely deep to talk about. And I see that carry on throughout history. And when it comes to control, the whole institution of slavery is founded on the fact of controlling the slaves, and how there's more slaves than masters. So to control, or for that outbalance to exist, that the fewer people have to control the masses, which were the slaves, which were the African Americans. They have to control them. And one way they did that is to control the amount of information they knew, the amount of information they knew outside of the plantation, how much information they knew in terms of skills like reading and writing, to be able to keep them as a slave and make them believe that it was destined for them to be a slave, and future generations of their people to continue being slaves to the white person. And that's where Frederick Douglass happened to get the inch that slave owners were fearing when it comes to teaching them how to read and understanding, and for slaves to understand how to read and write, because that's the 1 inch that will lead on to them freeing themselves and running away and rebelling against the slave institution. And him reading, or Frederick Douglass reading the Columbian Orator and understanding the concept of freedom, he broke that shackle, that mental shackle, that he can only be a slave and that he is a slave for life, which was what he was hearing as he was growing up. And you could definitely see the issues of control and white people trying to control how much black people progress through the Tulsa Race Massacre and them burning down our Black Wall Street, and the progress we've managed to amass during that time, and burning that to the ground, incurring in damages well beyond the property damages and the businesses, but also the generational wealth that could have been had if it were to continue to have prospered the way that it did. And social justice, you definitely start to see that, some forms of media, African American media that talk about it. There's definitely the Baldwin and Buckley debate, when at the beginning of the debate, Baldwin started to talk about what is the point of Congress passing another law that is supposed to help Black people against the oppressors and against people that have all ill intent and only ill intent for them. What's the point of Congress passing another law if the people aren't going to, or if the American people aren't going to uphold the law and then basically ignore it? And that goes back into the lynchings and how the lynchings weren't lawful at all. The lynch moms were essentially bypassing the law and taking the law into their own hands. That's not lawful. That's not lawful at all. So he talks about what is the point in us trying to get another law to be passed, and it's not even going to be upheld in the judicial system. And that goes into the ethics of the issues of ethics in the way African American literature discusses that. Using the same debate as another example, he was talking about how the MLK nonviolent protest, the nonviolent movement, talked about their sense of morality, or it pierced white people's sense of morality because it made them think, am I doing the right thing? Is this right? Because in their minds, as they're committing these atrocities towards Black people, they fully in their heart believed that they were doing the right thing and that their actions had a purpose and it was justified. And that MLK nonviolent protest essentially made them reconsider their subconscious in the way that they were brought up to believe that they can do whatever to whatever Black person they see. And I found that to be very interesting. And moving on to the third question, what is Blackness? Or this is me reading the question. What is Blackness? Is it real? Is it a social construct? Is it both? And what role does literature play in constructing Blackness? This is probably like my favorite question to answer, just because it goes into what does it mean to be a Black person? And when it comes to social construct, because I think Blackness is a real thing and a social construct, as both can be. And when you think about it being a social construct, you have to think about what is whiteness, or what does the term white mean? And you start to see that white means pure, intelligent, better, superior, powerful, rich, all the positive adjectives in the book, in the dictionary, you would associate that with white. And when you think of Blackness as a social construct, you can see how the way they use it against us with the birth of the nation, depicting us as barbaric, savages, rapists, thieves, ignorant people, and how social construct was used to put us down and to make us feel like we weren't as we can attain the same amount. We can be with or equal to white people at all. And you start to see that if you think about it as a social construct, but you also see that used to uplift our people with Alan Locke in saying that the old Negro, during the new Negro movement, that the old Negro was no more, and that the old Negro is a formulae, or that's where I got the social construct aspect of us keeping us down. The old Negro was the thing keeping us down, or just the social construct. And the new Negro is a human being, he's a human being. So when I think about that, that's the way I think about the social construct part, but I also see it being an actual thing when it comes to depicting what Black people have to do in order to exist, in order to thrive, in order to be. And you go into us wearing a mask to simulate. Numerous authors talk about it, most notably Dunbar in his poem, We Wear a Mask. And to give an actual quote, we wear a mask with torn and bleeding hearts as we smile. And we have to wear this mask. I'm not reading the quote anymore, but we wear this mask to assimilate into white society. And that's definitely a very important part in being a Black person now, I mean, back then and even today, where we have to assimilate into white society. We have to code switch and change the way we speak in order for us to attain the positions that we want, the higher positions that we want. And as we wear this mask, we also suffer the repercussions of trying to cater to the white society and also fitting with our people. And I didn't really pay close attention to the way Baldwin was talking about the way he grew up and how his father had to talk about, or not, his father had to keep inside what he was dealing with because he couldn't quit his job. And that's why he was always mad coming home, because he had to put up that mask when he was out in the workplace, but at home, he can't keep that mask up all the time. So that rage ends up going into the household. And that's a vicious cycle and a very unfortunate cycle that Black people have to go with. But in terms of positives, or another aspect of being Black, is definitely our resilience. When you see African American literature, you always see what we've come from, the challenges we have to face in order to be what we, like I was saying before, what we have to do to essentially be and attain the higher positions that we want, that we feel that it is deserved of us, that we can achieve. And that's definitely, the resilience part definitely plays a big part in us as a people. And literature discusses that in full. This class has been very informing, and I don't think any class when it comes to being Black was as important as African American literature. And as a designer, as an artist, as a person that's trying to strive for his goals by any means necessary, understanding where I fit into the society I'm growing up in and I'm growing up in and growing in, it's definitely important to see where I've come from and how I fit into today's society. I'll always remember this class. Shout out my professor, Professor Cosby, in giving us the tools and resources to understand us, or understand ourselves as a Black person and what to do about it, and to not sit down to what they give us, and to be resilient as we've seen throughout African American history and literature. So I just plan to be resilient. I plan to not take what's given to me and strive for greatness, because we've been given, or we just got to keep progressing as a people, as an individual. But it definitely starts with each and every person striving for that greatness. So as a collective, we end up doing the same. So yeah, I'll always enjoy this class. But yeah, that's the end of my response. So I'm getting like way close to 25 minutes. So I don't want to go over that. But yeah, see you around, Professor. And appreciate everyone else that watches this. It's definitely been a long semester and a long journey as a Black person discovering your history. But yeah, peace out.